All right, everybody, thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to us on one of the radio stations, thanks so much. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and share this interview with an amazing person who we've had on here twice. And if you're listening to us on one of the podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Stitcher, and the rest of them, we really appreciate that. There's so many to name. It's really incredible to remember all of them. So we'll move forward with this. We have a living legend back on the radio again, and I'm excited to have him on because he's one of my favorite radio hosts. He tells it like it is when he's on the radio, which that's why I love him, and he's a great talk show host, Thom Hartmann, and he is on to talk about another book he's done, and one of the hidden histories, and we've had him on to talk about a couple others. He's done so many, it's hard to remember. How many hidden histories have you done, Thom, so far, by the way?
I have written 7, and this is the 6th one to come out. The last one will be out early next year.
It is The Hidden History of American Healthcare, Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich. First of all, thanks, Thom, for coming on. And second of all, thanks for writing this book. It's an important book.
Thank you, Rob. And thanks for having me on your program. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
All right. So first of all, let's talk about this. So, we talk about healthcare. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about how healthcare has changed since, we were talking about it before we got on the air of how Truman tried this back in 1945 and how everything's pretty much changed to heck, in plain English, to what it is now.
Yeah. Well, when I did the research for this book, typically I spend, at least a few months just obsessively researching the topics for the books, and, in addition to whatever I've known for most of my life. And I was actually shocked when I dug into the history of why America uniquely is the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a Medicare for all system or something very close to it, and that doesn't explicitly in law or even in their constitution say that healthcare is a right the government has a responsibility to make sure everyone has access to. And what I found was that modern healthcare, modern medicine, really began to be a thing after the Civil War. The injuries of the Civil War actually brought us a lot of advancements in medicine, in anesthesia. We got ether and a more widespread use of morphine out of during that era, and a lot of advanced surgical techniques that came out of the Civil War. And so, it was the 1880s, more or less, and the 1890s was when America first started seriously talking about having a national healthcare system. And part of that conversation was spurred by the fact that in the late 1880s or early 1890s, I'm sorry, I forget the year, it's in the book, Germany adopted a national single-payer healthcare system. It was done under the Kaiser. And everybody was in, it was paid for with tax dollars, and everybody was covered comprehensively. It covered, pretty much anything that had to do with your body, from, eyeglasses and teeth to an appendectomy. And so this conversation started in the United States, and a German immigrant to the United States by the name of Frederick Hoffman came over to this country and wanted to make a name for himself. He wanted to become a big shot and a famous guy. He was basically a high school graduate, but he was very ambitious. And when he was traveling around the South, he ended up marrying an American woman, and she was from Georgia. And so he spent a fair amount of time in the South. And when he was down in the South, he got exposed to this scientific racism theory that was widespread in the United States at the time. And he ended up writing a book called Race Traits of the American Negro. And in this book, he says that African Americans are genetically so inferior to white people that if we just withhold healthcare from them, they'll all die out. And that will solve the race problem in America. And that was not only the focus of his book, but in the early 1900s, as he became famous for writing this book, he was hired by the Prudential Insurance Company, which at that time was just offering fire and liability insurance and things like that, and life insurance. Life insurance was actually their bread and butter. He was hired by this company as in the 19 teens and 1920s, and particularly after the flu pandemic of 1918, Americans were again demanding a national healthcare system. And so Prudential didn't want that to happen. They wanted to go into healthcare insurance themselves, which they did in the 1920s. And so Frederick Hoffman became this one-man lobbying machine. He gave tours all around America. I mean, dozens and dozens of cities every single year, giving speeches about how Blacks were genetically inferior and we shouldn't have a national healthcare system because it would prevent the elimination of the Black race, the scourge of the Black race in America. And he was doing all this as the vice president of the largest insurance company in America. And he was taken very seriously. He testified before Congress on multiple occasions, met with presidents. And this became this idea that if we have a national healthcare system, then Black people will have access to it. And that will cause them not only not to go away, but might even cause them to become, more populous, because another part of the white racist theory about Black people back then was that they're crazy for sex and they're always having babies. And so, and Hoffman was pushing that as well. And that became basically the sales pitch that the Southern, largely Democratic Party politicians pre-1965 used to prevent any kind of a national healthcare system in the United States. It was also picked up by the American Medical Association, which was all white by their bylaws and their constitution. And so there was a separate medical association for Black physicians. But the AMA also didn't want there to be a national health system because they didn't want white doctors to be forced to treat Black patients. The hospital associations of America didn't want a national healthcare system because they didn't want Black patients to be in hospitals with white people. And, this was at least between the insurance industry, the Prudential company at the time, and by the 1940s, a couple of their allies, between the insurance companies saying, no, we want to control this marketplace because we can make a profit on it. And the white racists saying, we want to make sure that Black people never have, access to comprehensive health care. It was the perfect storm. And so then you got Ronald Reagan in 1964 or 5, recording that famous album saying that if we have Medicare, that Medicare will be it's opening the door to socialism, and someday we'll look back on when men were free, and which was code for white men, and it's just continued since then.
It's crazy that how this had started, and thank you for telling the viewers that, because I know a lot of people didn't really know about how healthcare started in this country. So, I'm an advocate for Medicare for all. I know you are for sure. Can you tell the viewers that, most of the people that listen to this are very progressive, but if we do get a person that's not progressive, why is Medicare for all the right solution to all of our problems?
It's a public health issue, and I think that the coronavirus is really making that obvious. What I used to say before the virus came along, the coronavirus, was, people would say, well, I don't want to, fill in the blank. Typically, the word was immigrants, but I don't want immigrants to have health care that I'm paying for with my tax dollars. Or, I don't want poor people who aren't willing to go out and work for a living to have health care that I'm paying for with my tax dollars. And my answer to all of them was always, well, do you want to be sitting next to an immigrant or an unemployed person on the bus who's got tuberculosis and is coughing all over you? Seriously? I mean, do you want to, be walking through a store or sitting in a restaurant and have that person serving your food to you as they're coughing into their sleeve? Is that really the country you want to live in? Well, now that with the coronavirus, it's become really obvious that healthcare is public health, that there's a very clear relationship between the two. We now have millions of Americans, literally millions of Americans, who are uninsured or underinsured, who have been wiped out financially, their entire families now, by simply having gotten COVID. And I'm not talking about the people who died. I'm talking about the people who survived, but ended up, with hospital bills. I mean, just visiting the emergency room and being diagnosed can cost you 20, 30, 40,000 bucks. For some families, that's a hole they'll never dig out. And so we're going from, in an average year, having around 500,000 medical bankruptcies in America pre-COVID, to now, last year it was over 800,000. This year it'll probably be over 1 million. And by the way, the total number of families that go bankrupt in Canada, Sweden, Norway, Germany, Finland, Denmark, France, Greece, Spain, Italy, all those countries combined, the total number of families who go bankrupt because somebody in the family got sick is 0. In the United States, it's typically 500,000. And so, this should not be a partisan issue. I realize that the health insurance companies are heavily funding the Republican Party and a few Democrats as well. Joe Lieberman is the famous example. There's a whole chapter in my book about how he screwed us on Obamacare after taking $1 million from the health insurance industry. Literally over $1 million. But increasingly, I think Americans are figuring out that this thing is a scam that is costing us a fortune.
Right. And I want to talk about the misinformation behind Medicare for All, but just to go into this, because this is partially an audience question, but it does fit in with what you were saying about the pandemic. We have seen throughout the pandemic in March of 2020 until now, and obviously the pandemic is still going on, people have been afraid to go to the hospital to get tested for COVID. They were worried about, paying for those tests at the beginning. Now, obviously those tests are free, but some people are still have that misinformation that they believe that they're going to get charged for those tests.
Well, and they're not free if you go to the ER. The test may be free, but they're going to charge you all the ER. I mean, it's in most places, just walk in the ER, whether it's an ingrown toenail or a car accident, and literally just walking in the door is 10 grand.
Well, Tom, I remember that there was an article back in Time magazine a little while back that there was somebody that went into the hospital for coronavirus. They were charged almost over $1 million or close to $1 million. I remember that article. So people are scared to get checked unless you have that health insurance. And I want to go into this because I guess we'll get into this just because this fits with the topic, even though it's an audience question about Bernie. We go back to 2020, and I think he made some mistakes on the campaign trail, but going into the healthcare issue, do you believe that Bernie should have stayed in the race later? I mean, I know there was a lot of issues with coronavirus. He was 78 years old at the time. He had just taken that, he had to go to the hospital for the stints, I should say, with the heart attack. But my thing was, and this is where I want to get back into healthcare, was Bernie could have made that argument about Joe Biden for Medicare for All. Joe Biden was tooting his mouth about the public option, which he still hasn't done anything about right now as far as being president. And that's not in any of this Family Act, which they're trying to pass with the infrastructure bill. There's people that are not working right now that lost their job due to the coronavirus that might have got their health insurance through work. They have no health care right now. There's also like the people you said that don't have health care, period. This is a health issue. I just think that was such a missed opportunity that he got out of the race too early to really pounce on this. And also people don't go back and talk about South Carolina, where Jim Clyburn, who came out and saved Joe Biden from oblivion, and Jim Clyburn is financed by the pharma industry. He gets the most pharma money for anybody in Congress. So I just think those were two huge issues that were mistaken by the Bernie Sanders campaign. Do you agree with that?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yeah, Jim Clyburn not only intervened in that primary, but he also intervened in the one in Ohio.
Right, with Nina Turner.
Nina Turner, who was another advocate for Medicare for All. In fact, that was her principal issue. And her opponent was not in favor of Medicare for All. But exactly why Clyburn did it in both cases could have been pharma money. It could have been other factors. There was a widespread belief among many in the Democratic caucus that Bernie couldn't beat Donald Trump. I think that belief was entirely wrong. In fact, I think the opposite was the case. I think he would have beat Trump better, more easily than Joe Biden did. But we'll never be able to reality test that. But I think that when Bernie did, push Medicare for All consistently, he never backed away from that. The $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill has not yet been finalized. In fact, just yesterday they had the vote on the basically the package, which is just an outline. It's just bullet points, basically. And, it's moving forward. And I'm betting that will have a public option. In fact, there's several news reports suggesting that to be the case right now. Problem is, you've got everything that goes into that bill has to be able to go through reconciliation. It has to be approved by the Senate parliamentarian, and that may be the thing that kills it. I don't know. But I think that when Bernie pulled out of the race, it was largely because of Jim Clyburn's intervention and that whole Super Tuesday sweep of states that had large Black populations. And they were listening. I mean, these are folks who've been listening to Jim Clyburn their whole entire lives. And Bernie Sanders was a relative newcomer to many in the African-American community in America. So I think Bernie just got out when it became obvious that he couldn't beat Hillary Clinton, and staying in would only serve the purpose of diminishing general support for her, which might translate into a loss in the general election, or excuse me, Joe Biden. Right. And staying in might translate into a loss in the general election and against Trump. And I think Bernie very wisely did not want to even take a chance of that happening.
So you heard that the public option, because I was told that, the Medicare at 60 was in there for sure with the dental, right, and vision. And I forgot what the other thing is. You can correct me on hearing. That, but hearing, right. Yes. I heard that would be in for sure, but I didn't hear anything about the public option. But my
understanding, and I haven't had a conversation with Chuck Schumer about this. I mean, my understanding, which may be wrong, is that the question is if a public option, which opens the door to Medicare for all, right, if that would pass the parliamentarians' test to allow the entire piece of legislation to be passed by reconciliation. You can change how things are funded. You can change how taxes are established, but you can't change the parameters of the tax. In other words, you can't just decide, okay, we're going to start taxing something entirely different now. You can't say, oh, we're going to start spending money in an area that we have never spent money in before, that has no connection to any existing law. Everything has to be kind of built on something else in order to pass reconciliation. And it has to follow that narrow line of involving both taxing and spending. And my understanding is that Medicare for all may do that and may not do that, and they're trying to figure it out. So, I guarantee you that many of not all, obviously, the Democratic caucus, well, and that's the other problem. Many of the members of the Democratic caucus, including many of the people that we have always thought of as being moderate, people like Chuck Schumer, are in favor of a buy-in, a public option for Medicare. But between the parliamentarian and the fact that they're going to have to have 50 votes, and we still have senators from states where health insurance is a huge industry, Delaware and Connecticut and whatnot. They also may be thinking about just, are we going to lose any of those 50 votes with this? It's a tough one.
Yeah, Thom, I
wouldn't want to be in Chuck Schumer's shoes right now.
I'll move on, but I just remember, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I was told that back when Bush was the president, that the Senate parliamentarian, the Republicans actually fired the Senate parliamentarian.
Yeah, Trent Lott did that in 2001, I think it was.
So my thing is, why can't the Democrats step up and act like Republicans and fire the Senate parliamentarian, get these things passed? These are what the people wanted. I mean, you watch the Democratic primary more than anybody. 87%, I know we're not going to get Medicare for all with Joe Biden, but I'm just saying 87% of the people that voted in the Democratic Party wanted Medicare for all. So get the public option. Bernie made this talk, and I know he's not president, but it would be nice to have a president that had the cojones and step up and fight against Joe Manchin, fight against Kristen Sinema, and say, I'm the president, not you. Let's get some things done so we can keep the House and keep the Senate in Democratic hands in 2022 and not play patty cakes with the Republicans. I'm sorry, I got a little emotional. It's just
no. I'm saying the same thing on my program all the time, or something very close to it. LBJ knew how to take names and kick ass, and he did it regularly. He also knew how to make deals. Right. He knew how to say, I'm going to give you this, And if you don't go along, I'm going to whoop you with this.
Mm.
And he was just blunt about it. You know, there's the famous story of when he grabbed the Fed chair by the shirt collar, slammed him up against the wall, and lifted him, you know, 3 inches off the floor and yelled at him. You know, LBJ could be a tough ass guy. And the same was true of Franklin Roosevelt, by the way, you know, 2 of our greatest Democratic presidents. Joe Biden is not that. You know, Joe Biden is a creature of the Senate, and the Senate is, you know, debate and you know, let's reconcile with each other. Let's work things out. Let's have a, you know, a solution to these things. The question is, how quickly is he going to become disillusioned with how dysfunctional the Senate is, and at what point is he going to say screw them all? The problem is that unlike LBJ, who had over 65 senators, you know, on the Democratic side, I don't recall the exact number, and unlike Franklin Roosevelt, who had more than 70, as I recall. Don't quote me on the numbers, but both of them had massive majorities in the Senate, and so they could lose a few senators, and they both did. LBJ more than FDR. Joe Biden doesn't have that option. He has 50 senators, and he needs 50 senators plus Kamala Harris in order to pass anything by reconciliation. And if just one senator says, see you later, he's toast. And so, you know, and that's a simple political reality that you and I could yell and scream about all day long. And I'm certainly doing that. I'm guessing you are too. But, you know, there are limits.
Joe Biden saw what happened in the Obama administration when they were trying to play patty cakes with the Republicans, and they swept, you know, Obama lost, I believe, 1,000 seats as far as state legislatures throughout his term as president. Obviously, he lost the House and the Senate throughout those times of the presidency. You know, I just, you know, he was there then as far as Joe Biden, and he just, I don't know. It's just, it bothers me, but we'll move on. It's just, you've been there, done that, you know, learn from your mistakes. And all these people that have met with President Biden, they saw what happened in the Obama administration. I mean, it's the Republican Party has changed, we'll just say, to end this, since Joe Biden got in the Senate in 1972. This isn't a bipartisan. This isn't Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan as far as president and Speaker of the House.
To a large extent, Rob, this informs us of the importance of 2022, of that election. Because if we can pick up 3 or 4 or 5 Democratic seats in the Senate, then we can tell Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to go screw themselves. Right. If we lose even 1 seat in the Senate, then our entire conversation becomes academic.
Kyrsten Sinema is a travesty, by the way. I mean, I heard that she just came out, and then I'm going to continue with the interview. She just came out and said that to Joe Biden that she hopes that this doesn't go over her vacation. I mean, yeah. I'm thinking the people that are in Arizona, I hope they're really remembering this.
Oh, she's down. She's underwater, badly underwater in Arizona. And I think, but she's not up for re-election until 2024. Right. So I doubt she'll get reelected. And I'm guessing, since she's now taking money from the right-wing billionaires, that there'll be a nice fat, you know, $2 million a year job waiting for her at, you know, some oil company or some think tank or whatever. I mean, you know, they always take care of their own.
Right. So to move back into Medicare for All, Thom. So my thing is, the only way I personally believe that Medicare for All is going to pass is if we fix the campaign finance reform laws. Unless we do that, I don't think it's got a shot in hell, because we do have people like James Clyburn, and there's a list that's bigger, way bigger than him, of people that take money from Big Pharma in the Congress and in the U.S. Senate. So do you agree with that, or do you see Medicare for All somewhat passing? Because if the time to pass Medicare for All was any time, it was through the 2020 pandemic.
I think the core cancer at the heart of American democracy is money. Right. And it was put there front and center by the US Supreme Court. After the Nixon bribery scandals in 74, 75, Congress passed some really good protections. Campaign contribution limits of a little over $2,000 per person, limiting corporate cash, limiting what we call dark money, making a lot of that stuff just outright illegal. There were severe restrictions on what billionaires could do to buy campaigns, you know, contributions in kind, buying ads that are not by the campaign, but, you know, somebody else on their behalf. All of that stuff was put in a box. And then in 1976, with Lewis Powell now on the Supreme Court, in a decision called Buckley versus Buckley versus Vallejo, the Supreme Court decided that when a billionaire pours money down the throat of a politician to the point that the politician does everything the billionaire says and nothing else, we used to call that, a captive politician or a corrupt politician. We used to call it political corruption or bribery. The Supreme Court said you can't use those words anymore. That money is no longer money. It's now free speech, and speech, of course, is protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. And then 2 years later, in the First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti decision, they extended that logic to corporations. And then, of course, as everybody knows, in 2010, they doubled down on both of them. They expanded it, made it even wider, those protections, and just burrowed it so deeply into American law. It's going to take a constitutional amendment or some real brilliant legislation to extract it. So the Supreme Court poisoned America, and with all this money, and it is our single biggest challenge right now.
Thom Hartmann here on Fire Breathing Rob. Again, the book is The Hidden Histories of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich. Thom, as we keep going into this, I was just wondering, have you talked to any doctors about Medicare for All, and what is their opinion on this?
I was the keynote speaker at Physicians for a National Healthcare Plan, PNHP, which is a doctor-only organization. I was their keynote speaker maybe 10 years ago at their annual convention in Seattle. Might have even been longer than 10 years ago. And, have kept in touch with them more or less, or kind of followed them over the years since then. They are among the leading organizations pushing for Medicare for all. They were then. And, or at least they were pushing for a single payer healthcare system is what they referred to it as then. Now, people who are and have historically been in favor of single payer are embracing this phrase Medicare for all, because most Americans, you say single payer and they go, what? You say Medicare for all and they go, oh, I know what that is. And there have been surveys done of American physicians, and depending on who's doing the survey and when and exactly what the language is like, what we find is that somewhere between 35 and 65% of American physicians think that Medicare for all is a good idea. I'm guessing that the ones who don't think it's a good idea are the ones in the specialties where they routinely make millions and millions of dollars a year, and they want to keep that gravy train rolling. But,
what is the oh, sorry, Thom, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say physicians are not immune to politics either. There is a right-wing group of doctors. It's not the American Medical Association, it's like the American Physicians and Surgeons Association or something like that. And, it's just come about in the last decade or so, as I recall. Maybe it's been around longer, but it's just totally right-wing doctors. And they're constantly putting out pronouncements about, Medicare for all is socialism and it'll destroy American healthcare. And you don't want to end up like those other countries. And, really, we don't want to end up like a country that has no medical bankruptcies, really? But they're there, and doctors are not immune to those political pressures either.
What do you feel like the issues were with Obamacare, is why it didn't come out as good as it was, meant to be?
Well, the two big problems Obamacare had was, number one, it expanded Medicaid across the entire United States, which would have brought in, about a quarter of America, as I recall, the working poor, basically. Right. In most red states, you're eligible for Medicaid if you are dirt poor, if you make less than $2,000 a year, or if you are, well, that's it actually. And then Obamacare would kick in if you made over $12,000 or $13,000 a year as a percentage of the poverty rate in that state. And so those people who made more than $2,000 a year and less than $13,000 a year, more or less in most of the red states, there was this giant hole, there was no coverage whatsoever. And Obamacare expanded that, but then the Supreme Court stepped in and gutted that, said, no, you can't do that. It's up to the states. So we still have, 3/4, 4/5 of the Republican controlled states where Medicaid has not kicked in, and it would have been viewed not as Medicaid, it would have been viewed as Obamacare, or as the gift of Obamacare, and thus it would have been very politically popular, I think. And by the way, including not just, for poor blacks in the South, which was always, was often the conversation that Republicans used to talk about it, but for poor whites in Appalachia, well, all across America. And I think that it would have had the impact of even influencing politics, in that many poor white voters who voted for Donald Trump might have been inclined to vote for a Democrat if they thought that Obama had gotten them free health insurance. So the Supreme Court screwed that one. And then on top of that, of course, the entire thing was done through for-profit health insurance companies. And the for-profit health insurance companies, they were making 20, 30, 35, 40% profit on their health insurance policies. Obamacare limited that, capped that at 20%, but that's still a 20% tax on all of us that goes into the profits of the health insurance companies. And so, it was always going to be more expensive than a single payer system.
So last question before we go into some audience questions. What do you hope viewers get out of the book, Thom?
Well, I think the most important things to understand are, number one, healthcare is public health, and public health is individual healthcare. You can't disentangle the two. They are interconnected in a way that, like I said, we're seeing writ large right now with COVID. Number one. Number two, that the reason why we don't have a national healthcare system in the United States is not because it's bad or it's awful or people don't want it or anything like that. We don't have it largely because of white racism. In fact, I would say exclusively because of white racism, and that needs to be acknowledged so that it can be knocked down. Number three, that we are wildly overpaying for our health insurance and our health care. When you got United Healthcare, their first CEO, William McGuire, walked away with $1.5 billion as compensation. The guy who followed him, Stephen J. Hemsley, walked away with nearly $1 billion in compensation. And that company has, I'm not sure if it's over 100 or slightly fewer than 100, but in the neighborhood of 100 executives who are making over $1 million a year. Across the health insurance industry, you've got hundreds, maybe over 1,000 executives making over $1 million a year. It's insane. And then stockholders making literally billions. I mean, one of these companies, I believe it was United Healthcare, might have been Aetna, just a month or two ago declared a quarterly profit of $3 billion. I mean, wow. That's money that could be used to keep people well. Right. And so we are, not only are we wildly overpaying for our healthcare and health insurance, but the money that we're using to overpay that is going into the pockets of a very small number of very wealthy people who are already very wealthy. And we need to fix that. Just, it's not just a sense of national policy and public health policy, but also out of a sense of fairness and decency. So those are the main points and there is a path to Medicare for all, to getting rid of the health insurance companies. There's a chapter in my book, one of the things I propose is just buy the health insurance companies. The market value of the 5 largest health insurance companies is about $1.5 trillion. If the federal government just said to them, okay, you're worth 1.5 trillion, we'll give you 1.8 trillion. All the decision makers in all these companies can retire with $1 billion. Or hundreds of millions of dollars. Isn't it time to just let go? Rather than saying, we're going to run you out of business, we're going to crush you, we're going to, compete you to death with Medicare. Why not just buy them out as one option? So, there are things that can be done. That's not necessarily the best way to do it, but it's certainly one way to do it.
There was a big thing in independent media back in January of 2021, forced the vote, trying to get the squad members to push Nancy Pelosi to get that vote on Medicare for all. Were you for that or against that? And do you believe that could have been a factor, that we have these people on the record? We do that vote, even though we know Medicare for all is not going to pass. We have the people on the record in the House of Representatives that are for Medicare for all and the people that are against it. And then we can put progressive challenges on the people that are against Medicare for all, as far as the Democrats.
Right. I understand the logic of that. I had a conversation on the air about this with Congressman Mark Pocan, who was the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And I don't want to speak for him or on behalf of him, but what I understood him to say, my understanding, not his, What I understood him to say was that there are a lot of Democratic members of Congress who we don't yet know if they would support Medicare for all or not. And if they were put on the record with a vote that was definitely going to lose anyway, but if they were put on the record with that vote and they voted no, that would open the door to the health insurance companies and the big pharma companies saying, oh, these are the guys we need to buy. We need to start pouring money into their campaigns and make them bulletproof. And it would strengthen and stiffen the resistance to Medicare for all. Whereas if we don't put them to a vote, if we don't get them on the record, there is still an opportunity to convince them to change their mind. There's still an opportunity for their constituents, because they won't have dug their feet in, right? Once they dig their heels in, we're screwed. And so this was it was a vote that would definitely lose. B, it was a vote that many of us on the progressive left saw with some hope as something that could be used to weed out some of the moderates. But C, it had such a potential to backfire on the progressives that ultimately, across the caucus, they decided not to hold that vote.
Next question is on the infrastructure bill and the American Families Plans bill, which is the reconciliation bill. Do you believe that this stuff is going to get done? I know the senator from Tennessee just put a hold. There's a procedural hold on that. Now there could be a vote. Apparently it's Tuesday at 3 a.m. Can you clear this up for me and the listeners about what you think is going to be the next step for the bill and for the American Families Plan? Are they all going to get passed, do you believe?
A lot's going to depend on the progressives in the House. The game that's being played right now is that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans are trying to delay this as much as they can, knowing that after the summer recess, as we go to September and October, campaign season will have begun for 2022. Certainly the campaign season for the primaries, which will be happening in February through May of next year. And almost nothing can get done during campaign time. It's just really hard to pull a caucus together to do anything. So what the bet Mitch McConnell is making is that he'll let the small $1 trillion bill go through. It's got public-private partnerships, which Republicans love. It's got a whole pile of cash for the broadband, for-profit broadband companies, which Republicans love. It's got there's a lot of Republican wish list stuff in there, and there's some good stuff the Democrats like too, but mostly it's fixing the potholes, which is relatively non-controversial. So McConnell figures we can let this $1 trillion bill pass, and that way we can take credit for everything that happens, we Republicans, and it'll let all the steam out of the balloon, all the air out of the balloon for the Democrats' second infrastructure bill. You're just going to look at them and go, we just passed infrastructure. What are you talking about? You trying to have two bites at the apple? Come on, guys. And that's going to be the response. And you know this, Rob.
Yeah.
And so the question is, can the Democrats get this through Congress fast enough? Will Chuck Schumer hold a summer session the way that Mitch McConnell did when he was cranking judges through the system for 2 years in a row?
Right.
Will Chuck Schumer play hardball with this or not? If Schumer fails to play hardball, then I think it's going to play out exactly the way I just described, and the $3.5 trillion bill will be toast. It'll fall. It'll succumb to Democratic Party infighting in primaries. If they can get it pushed through, and then it goes to the House, where it's going to have to be modified through reconciliation, because the House has not passed a similar bill. The House's bill was quite different. If it goes after it goes to the House, if the progressives in the House continue to hold the line, Congressman Ro Khanna, who's now a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, on my program 2 weeks ago said, pledged he would vote against it in the House.
Good.
If the Progressive Caucus can block the $1 trillion bill, if it's not, passed at the same time the $3.5 trillion bill is, then there's a possibility we can get both, but there's also a possibility we'll get neither. And the neither part is going to hurt the Progressive Caucus badly. They will be viewed the way that Joe Lieberman is now viewed with regard to Obamacare. So this is a very, very, very delicate dance that these Democrats are playing, are doing, and the Republicans are doing everything they can to manipulate the situation and present the Democrats with a progressively more distasteful or more difficult series of choices that they have to make. I don't see any easy answers. I think the Democrats are playing it well now. But probably the next 3 weeks are going to tell us.
Well, if they don't get anything passed, or if they don't get that family plans passed, I think that they're going to be toast in 2022. But my thing is,
hurt them badly in the election, which is why Mitch McConnell is doing it.
Well, my question is, and I want to move on to the last 3 questions before I let you go. Don't you feel like the progressive left, Ro Khanna, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Mark Pocan, Ayanna Pressley, and the list goes on with a few others, Pramila Jayapal too. They should hold the line like the Tea Party did in 2010. I remember the debt ceiling. And they got a lot of these things that they wanted. And John Boehner hated these guys. He actually retired and went into the marijuana industry because they got him so fired up and stuff. So I just feel like we need to show a little bit of spine. And I hope you're right with what Ro Khanna said, that we can really, hold the line here, because I think that puts it on Joe Biden. I mean, we look what Cori Bush just did, that she was sleeping outside. And she didn't get all she wanted, but at least she put the heat on Joe Biden, and they got that moratorium extended. Right. At least it's a little bit.
Oh, it's FDR's famous, make me do it.
Right.
Absolutely. And the other big test is going to be, if the Progressive Caucus says no, we will not vote yes on this $1 trillion bill. Will the Republicans? Will it get passed with half the Democrats and all of the Republicans? That will be fascinating.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Now, there is something in that bill. We were talking about healthcare, and I just researched this before we were coming on because I didn't even know this. It's the False Claims Amendment, and this has got to do with healthcare with Chuck Grassley and Patrick Leahy. And it says that apparently, just a quick synopsis on this, it says doing business with the federal government is going to be riskier, more expensive for contractors. That they're going to have to hire lawyers for compliancy, and that's going to make a lot of drug prices go up. I don't know if you've heard about this dialysis. It says pacemakers and medicines of all kinds become more expensive. So this is in this infrastructure bill. It goes back to healthcare, like you said. And if healthcare goes up extremely, especially with a midterm coming up, it's going to hurt the Democrats again. So. And this is with a Democrat again, Patrick Leahy from Vermont.
Yeah, Pat Leahy is a good guy. What you're seeing here, Rob, is the exact same thing that we've seen every single time any effort to regulate any industry comes along. When we were going to clean up the meatpacking industry after Sinclair Lewis's novel The Jungle back in the 1920s. The meat industry was running advertisements and saying, the price of hamburger is going to double. Your steak is going to be you won't be able to buy it. When there were attempts to regulate the drug industry, they were saying the same thing. The attempts to regulate broadband, it's going to jack up your prices. Usually those threats are empty. Okay. They are always made. And these industries do not want to be regulated, but the reality is that as Inspector General after Inspector General was started in a big way with the Defense Department, but it's also happening in OSHA, in the EPA. It's happening, in numerous federal branches that give out contracts to individual contractors. And what they're finding is that there's just massive amounts of fraud. These contractors are just pocketing the money. They're inflating their own CEO's salaries. They're giving bonuses. They're doing sweetheart deals to their buddies. A lot of these contracts are no bid contracts. Trump put that whole process on steroids, just huge. I mean, literally trillions of dollars of federal contracts over the 4 years of his administration went out on a no bid basis to friends of Trump and friends of the Republican Party. And this is an effort to put the brakes on that. And so, of course, you're going to hear industry squealing about it. But I think it's a good thing.
last three questions. So, there's been talk about, and we go back into healthcare, it's another healthcare.
And by the way,
question.
let me add, the only reason that Chuck Grassley's on that is because he's retiring.
Right.
When Republicans retire, suddenly they get integrity occasionally.
What's your opinion on Biden's job performance so far?
I think by and large, Biden has done a good job. There are things I would like to see him do. I continue to believe that he can end $50,000 at least worth of student debt with an executive order. He apparently doesn't believe that's possible. Nancy Pelosi has said that's not possible, but I think she's wrong. I would love to see that put to some kind of a test, and the test would be for him to do it and then be sued, and then take that to the Supreme Court and see what happens. But that's just one relatively small thing. I realize it's a big deal for people with student debt. I have two kids who are in that situation. Actually, I have three kids in that situation. But it's if you look broadly, I think that he's moving in the right direction, and he's surrounded himself with some really good people, far more progressive than the people that Obama surrounded himself with. And he has largely rejected neoliberalism as a primary frame. And I think that that's all good stuff. He's not Bernie Sanders, but he's also not the Joe Biden of 5 years ago.
So your prediction for 2022, is it going to be a wipeout, or is it all, like I said, depend on the infrastructure and the family planning bill?
I think at this point in time, it's impossible to predict. I think that the infrastructure bill will be a piece of it. I think that the whole critical race theory hysteria, the question of how most effectively Republican politicians can activate their white racist base. George Herbert Walker Bush did it with his Willie Horton ad and just blew out Michael Dukakis. There have been different every Republican president, from Nixon's Southern Strategy to Bush with Dukakis, Reagan with his first speech being in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Schwermer, Cheney, and Goodman were murdered. George W. Bush blaming everything on brown-skinned Muslims from the Far East and declaring war on them. Trump, with the immigrants and Black people in general. The Republican Party has to activate their white racist base. That's their edge, as it were. And the way that they do that, whether this whole critical race theory thing is going to stick or not, is going to have a lot to do with it. Number one. Number two, crime is going to be a big deal. Yeah. And how Democrats respond to the increase both in petty crime and in murders. Which seems to have accompanied the 40 million additional handguns sold last year. How do the Democrats respond to that? That's going to have a lot to do with it. I don't think it's going to be a single issue election. Also, whether Joe Biden can get control of the pandemic, between now and the election is going to be a big deal. The Republicans have been pushing, don't wear a mask, don't get vaccinated, just get sick and shut down the economy, because they know that when the economy sinks, the party in power always loses. And you can see that pattern going literally back to the John Adams administration, the one-term John Adams. And they're doing everything they can to crash the economy and praying for it and jawboning it and trying to convince people to get out of the stock market and everything else. And if Biden can hold the economy together and get the coronavirus under control, then that's really going to help the Democrats. If the Republicans can continue in their efforts at sabotaging that through Fox News and Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and all the Murdoch efforts, it's going to become much more problematic. But it's way too early to make a prediction.
Well, Thom, I'm in Florida, and we have 4 people that might run for president: Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, and actually 3. I'm sorry, Ron DeSantis. So we have 3 people that might run for president. It's a scary time down here. I know it's way too early for these last quick questions, but I got to ask this, because if I don't, then people will be pissed off. Obviously this depends on what's going to happen with the next 2.5 years, but do you see a progressive challenging Joe Biden or Kamala Harris in 2024? Because my thing is, if Joe Biden doesn't run again, Joe Biden, I believe, is going to be 82, I believe, if he runs again. And Kamala Harris isn't the strongest candidate, in my opinion. So what is your opinion on that? Does it depend on if Biden runs again, or if it's just Harris running, or What is your opinion on 2024? I know it's early,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I'm not real sure, Rob. Kamala Harris has not yet caught the imagination of the American people. It might turn out that she was a great senator and a great state attorney general, but not the greatest vice president. I don't know. I mean, I'm still willing to give her the benefit of the doubt and give her, a little more time. That's 3 years away, 3.5 years away. Or the primaries and the decision making is maybe 2.5 years away. And maybe she will rise to the occasion and really step up. I mean, look at Joe Biden. At the end of the Obama administration, nobody seriously thought that he was, the red hot guy who was going to replace Obama. And in fact, he wasn't. I mean, he wasn't the party's nominee. So we'll see. I mean, another possibility is that Joe Biden, if he does run for a second term, will do what Franklin Roosevelt did. FDR had 3 different vice presidents in his 4 terms. So, that's a possibility too. I just don't know.
yeah, I just don't see Kamala Harris catching anybody's imagination. Progressives for sure. I know the Republicans hate her like anything.
Well, they hate her because she's black. I mean, that's
Right.
that's the thing. She would be the person, and she's a woman. Oh my God, women in power. Republicans hate women in power. So she would be the person who would activate the white racist base on the Republican side. The question is, by 2024, has that base been discredited and shrunk, or has it been empowered and grown?
I don't know. Trump is raising a lot of money, and Sean Spicer just came out and said that he thinks Trump's going to run again. So let's end with that. What is your opinion on that? I mean, the guy's got I don't like the guy, but he had so much energy on the campaign trail during huge rallies, and he got those people riled up, and they're still sending him money, which is going into his bank account.
Yeah, $100 million in the first 6 months of the year. And he's using it for his meals, and he's running it through his Trump properties. It's nuts. It's all, like you said, it's all going right into his pocket. That, by the way, stops when he declares his candidacy. When he declares that he's running, then a whole bunch of rules kick in on how he can use that money that will change a lot of things. And that's one of the reasons why he's going to postpone that decision as long as he possibly can. So I don't think we'll know. I mean, Trump is about the same age as Joe Biden. I think he's 2 years younger. And so he's not a young guy, and he's obese, and and he's got serious legal challenges, including the possibility of being charged with treason, or at the very least sedition. So we'll see.
All right, so we'll end with that. I did want to get your opinion on Cuomo. I don't know if you have an opinion on that.
Cuomo clearly, if the report from the AG is to be believed, then I see no reason not to.
Well, Joe Biden already told him he needs to step down, and they were buddy.
I agree. And, he clearly stepped over the line, and probably should resign. In fact, I've called for him to resign as governor of New York. That said, I would like to hear a little more about Matt Gaetz, who's been charged with sex trafficking and moving minors across interstate lines to pay them for sex. And Donald Trump's 26 credible rape allegations in the lawsuit by E. Jean Carroll, where she's still waiting for Trump to provide a DNA sample because she's still got the dress with the semen on it. It's like we get very, very wrapped up in these, let's go attack the Democrats thing, and Al Franken went down in flames when he absolutely should have fought that right to the end. And you look at, there was a time when we all thought the governor of Virginia, would never make it through his blackface scandal. And he's still there now and very popular again. I doubt that'll happen with Cuomo, and I don't want him to hang on. But damn it, why do we only talk about Democratic sex scandals? I don't get it.
Thom, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Can you tell people where they can get the book as we get ready to end the interview?
Oh yeah, it's any place you buy books. Just plug in my name and healthcare, and it'll pop right up.
All right,
or go to any store. Any store will carry it. It's carried. It's distributed nationwide.
All right, The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich. Thom Hartmann. You can check out his radio show from 12 to 3. Progressive Voices. ThomHartmann.com. Thom, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it tonight.
Thanks a lot, Rob. And one last plug, if I may. I've got a new
Sure.
project over at hartmanreport.com that it's worth
Okay.
checking out.
All right, hartmanreport.com. Hartman, now it's Tom. What is the hartmanreport.com? I guess tease that before we end the call.
I write an op-ed 5 days a week, and on Saturday I write a summary of the week's news. And that op-ed typically becomes my main rant on my radio show. There's no ads. It's a free subscription. It comes to you 5 days a week. So.
All right. So definitely check that out. hartmanreport.com. Tom, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Great talking with you, Rob.